Harini, thank you for being with us today and welcome. Um, as you're as you're aware, we've started this input project to raise awareness about the state of the river Kaveri today. And you've seen some of the footage that we've got, some of our experiences that we shared with you. We would love to hear from you today, given your experience working with water systems, being an ecologist, and having traveled the world, looking at how people have solved such problems across the world. I think there's a lot we can gain by picking your brain a bit. So thank you again for the time you're spending with us today. My first question to you, in general, what do you believe is the state of river systems in India today?
River systems, I think, around the world are in very bad shape, and in India is no exception. I think it's so there's multiple problems. Firstly, we are getting rainfall at unpredictable times and in unpredictable quantities because of climate change. So we either get too much, in which case the river is not able to hold it and there's flooding, or we get too little for long periods of time. There's drought, so you get very little water in the river, one way or the other, because it can't hold it. The second thing is because there's so much cutting of trees and denudation of topsoil and concretization because of towns and cities and too much construction along river banks. Water is not able to percolate into the river and hold it. So again, there's less water to the river because of these human reasons. And the third problem is what water that we do have is there's too much demand for it, unlike before. There's demand for agriculture, there's demand for industries, there's demand from all the people in cities. The number of people is more, and the kind of footprint they have, consumption, right? Most people are in cities and they require much more water, or they think they require much more water than people actually consume in rural areas. So what you have is less water, more people using it, people using much more of it. Industries pick up a lot of water, for instance, for their needs. Farming is now water intensive compared to the kind of farming we used to have before. And finally, a big problem is the pollution. As you've been documenting, I think in your Kaveri project's videos, there's dumping of trash, pollution by industries, sending in their leachate, sand mining, all kinds of things that are taking place in our rivers. So what water you have is polluted and unfit for drinking or consumption or anything. So I think our rivers are in bad shape because of all of these reasons.
And you mentioned climate change and erratic rainfall. So with rains becoming fairly erratic, how do you think this will further impact river systems in India?
It's going to impact them very adversely, because we know that we're going to have water scarcity and water wars are going to become a thing of the future. I think one of the big impacts of climate change that we're already seeing, for instance, in areas like Bangalore, is so many migrants into our cities. People are abandoning their farming land and moving into all the dry land areas near Raichur, Gulbarga. So many people moving into Bangalore and cities like this. And this climate change is going to have a big problem, because it really impacts the kind of water you have in wells, the kind of water you have in rivers and in these irrigation channels, and that is something we need to figure out how to better plan for.
Absolutely. And overall, I get the sense that India ranks very poorly in availability of clean potable water to the people. How bad is the situation?
The situation is extremely bad. I mean, if you look at cities, so many cities across the world. I think I was reading across India. I was reading a recent report from Delhi which said something like 25 to 30% of the poorest of the citizens of Delhi lack complete access to potable water. The same is true of Bangalore. For instance, the central part of the city gets piped water. The entire periphery, which is all the new BBMP areas, which is a large part of the city, is dependent on groundwater. And groundwater is coming from tankers which people can't essentially pay for. So a lot of this access of potable water, the situation is much worse in the villages, because you don't have piped water coming in from anywhere, and you don't have the capacity for bore wells and the electricity for often to operate these wells. So people are extremely dependent on the river. Where else will they go?
Now, specifically about the Kaveri, Harini, while there is awareness that this is critical for potable water, as you said, in many of our rural areas, there is no electricity to pump water, even if they have the wherewithal to dig a borewell. Apart from potable water, they also depend on it for irrigation and maybe even hydroelectricity in some places. But I'm sure there is much more to it than just that, right? I mean, these are things that we as common men are aware of. But anything that you would like to highlight on the significance of the river and its tributaries, apart from these known aspects?
Absolutely. What we think of when we think of water is energy, because you get hydroelectricity from from these tidal power plants and large dams. We think of water for industries and water for cities and water for irrigation. But water is essential for life, all kinds of life. And what we fail to understand, I think, in a lot of this planning is how many other livelihoods are dependent on rivers like the Kaveri, for instance. So there might be grazing that people have done, there's collecting of fuel wood, there is these plantations of fruit trees along the way, you know, what you call topes of various kinds, which provide you fruits that people live on. Agriculture, of course, but you know, just the small agriculture all the way to the big agriculture. It could be somebody's home garden that they are planting, and that gives them certain kinds of nourishment. If you look at the amount of cattle that actually use these banks of rivers, not just for grazing but for being washed, for drinking, because cattle also have to drink water, and often this is in the river. So kinds of livelihood uses and subsistence uses are huge. For instance, if you look at rural areas, you depend on your livelihood and your subsistence to multiple things. It's not like you just go to an industry to work, or you just go to a shop to work, or you just have agriculture. You will have a little bit of cattle, you will pick some flowers from somewhere, some fruits from somewhere, some herbs from somewhere. That's what makes a multifunctional life, and water is the source of all of this life.
Absolutely, great point. History tells us that our forefathers, right, a couple of centuries back or even earlier, seem to have got it right in terms of creating water sources for their people and preserving the cleanliness of that water and the hygiene of that water. Where did we go wrong?
A lot of places. We have been doing studies on Bangalore, which is very interesting. So Bangalore lacked access to a large river. There were these smaller water bodies which are human created tank systems. And they were kept extremely clean and very well functioning until the city started getting water from outside. When we started moving to Hesarghata and these dams on the Arkavati and further away, then we stopped preserving our own water bodies and started thinking of those places where we can dump trash. And that made a big difference. You know, so when you depend on the water that is right next to you, at least you take attempts to clean it. But when you start thinking that you can pump out water from a bore and get it in, from these tankers, or you can get water piped in from the river, then you don't think that you depend on this resource, and you can actually, I think that's where we went wrong.
While people know enough not to drink or use visibly polluted water because they can see that it's polluted, smell or taste that it's polluted, what is the impact a polluted river or water body would have on flora, fauna and the broader ecosystem?
Huge impact. So if you look at, for instance, across, I think, large parts of our river systems in South India, we lost the otters, and otters is considered apex predator. So it's just like a tiger tells you the health of the ecosystem, because the tiger eats things that eat things, so the entire chain has to be healthy for the tiger to be able to exist. Otters are somewhat similar, and otters have completely disappeared from many of these rivers because of these kinds of issues. Similarly, you think of something as simple as not just biodiversity that you don't see, but something as simple as cattle. And if you look at the health of the cattle, you talk to any of the agriculturalists and the grazers who have cattle along these rivers, polluted rivers, they'll tell you that the lifespan of their cattle has come down to about 50% or 60%, and the amount they pay for, in terms of treating these cattle is their bills, expenses are very high. So, and other kinds of wildlife, biodiversity in terms of the plants being poisoned because of tannery effluents and other kinds of effluents from industries, birds, butterflies. I think you have these really silent rivers which have been completely poisoned. Fish, of course. Fish are, I think, dead and gone from many of these rivers, especially the native fish like Masir. Only the exotic fish are able to survive some of these polluted rivers.
Oh, that is truly horrifying. The auto one is something that I have not heard of. I'm sure many people would not have heard of that as well. That's a great point. Thank you for telling us about that. How would you compare the Kaveri to the river Ganga in terms of pollution and the ability to restore it to a clean condition?
Both are extremely polluted. I don't think we have data. So I was looking for it when you asked this question. To effectively compare the Kaveri and the Ganga, you would need monitoring stations across the entire length that give you reliable continuous data, and this is the sad part. We don't really have the data to know how polluted, at what times, what seasons of the year, at which locations along these rivers. We don't have the data. All we know is both of them are extremely polluted, and in fact many of the rivers need cleanup. What we do know is Kaveri is perhaps one of the most intensely utilized rivers in India, because almost every part of it has a dam, some dam or the other. And so this is such an intensively managed river in terms of the flows, that management reduces the resilience of the river in the long term. That may not be something we can do in the short term. You can't change the structure of this river or the damming or the way in which this technical solutions have been sought for, but we should be looking for more local solutions that we can actually do and engage with.
Sure. Makes sense. And in restoring these polluted rivers, are there any success stories that we can draw inspiration from?
several, I think. And for instance, one good example which is very recent, much in the news, is the Tuta River in Kerala. So this particular river, there was a stretch where there were no otters and practically no fish. They used to do blasting for fish, dynamite blasting. There was a lot of sand mining, and there were cars. It's a road basically where people stop. So cars and tourist cars and buses, etc., used to get washed. People used to throw their waste. There's been a very active cleanup by the various local organizations who work with school children, who work with the panchayat, and they have stopped, first of all, the throwing of trash. They prevented trucks that come in the night that dump trash from other places, so they do midnight watches. They've prevented sand mining and talked to people to reduce this explosive blasting for fish. As the fish have returned, now otters are being seen in this river, which have not been seen for 15 years. And as I said, otters are a really good sign of a healthy river. So this is a really good inspiration. It shows you that people can actually work together to save at least one stretch of a river. And if multiple communities come forward to save such stretches that you can connect, then that's an entire river saved. Another very good example is, for instance, New Jersey. If you look at the Hudson River, which was extremely polluted about a few decades ago, about 15 years ago they started this very intensive cleanup system for the Hudson River. Of course, that was state sponsored, but one very nice thing that has come out of that was they realized that the state can't do anything on its own. You need communities also to step forward, you need local counties to step forward, and you have to have every step of the governance change, from citizens to community groups, NGOs, local counties, all the way up to the state. So what they do is every year they have a conference, which is a watershed management conference, where they get in activists, they get in the government management officials, they get in teachers, they get in schools, they get in NGOs, all kinds of groups that come together to share research, to share actual examples of projects that are working. This is a great way of helping people to cross-talk and network, and I think we have so many small groups working across the Kaveri. If we can have places like this that would facilitate such conversations and this kind of networking, that would be very nice.
Absolutely. And I think in a way you answered my next question, but I'm going to ask anyway to see if other insights will come out of it. I was going to ask, it's certainly easy to blame government authorities and their lackadaisical approach and expect them to fix the situation. But what role would the common people in the community have to play?
A huge role. Government can't do everything by itself, and communities can't do everything by themselves. So I think this is one big learning. If you look at political science, if you look at Elinor Ostrom, I think who should be a big inspiration for anyone looking at river networks across the globe. She won a Nobel Prize in 2011 in economics for her work on communities and their management of various systems, including a lot of irrigation and river systems. But one of the big insights that has emerged from her work is that you need what she calls polycentric governance or multi-level governance, which means every level, as I said, of this governance. You need the national government to be doing its job, the state governments to be doing their job, and the local governments. At the same time, you need civil society to come forward. You need NGOs who are working on the river. You need communities and local citizens. Let's take the lake that we're sitting here, Kaikondreddy Lake, for instance. If the government hadn't stepped forward with a restoration plan because the lake was so polluted, you needed some technical expertise as well as some finance that came in to restore this lake. That wouldn't have happened. On the other hand, if the community wasn't here at every stage making sure the restoration went according to plans, that it was locally suited to what the group here wanted, and monitoring every time to make sure that nobody's dumping garbage, nobody's building on the lake when they should not be building, that doesn't work. The government can't be everywhere, and the communities don't have the legal authority often or to take on big violators like industries. So you need that combination. We have to step forward, I think, as citizen groups, and people do step forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have a couple of examples like that we also met with as part of this journey that we did with the Kaveri.
There's so many people who've been working, but I think because everyone's working in their own local space, they're doing great work against tremendous odds, but perhaps some way that they can all work together coherently might help.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I just wanted to add in to say that you're doing great work with this, and maybe this can be a way forward for something like this.
I hope we can all bring all these people, as you said, who've been working against tremendous odds under one umbrella, right? I think that would be fantastic.
That would be fantastic.
Correct. So Harini, one thing that we read in futuristic books, articles, people generally stating their opinion is that the next major wars in the world will be fought around water, especially drinking water. Your thoughts on this?
I completely agree. I think you can see this already. There are projections that say that in another 10 years, something like 60% of the world's population will have occasional scarcity of water, and about 30% of the world's population will have will face chronic water shortages. And these numbers are anybody's guess. 60% could be 70%, could be, but certainly it's frightening that to think that majority of the world will have water shortages, either seasonal or continuous. So I think we're going to have a serious problem of water. We're not taking this seriously enough. Water and pollution, I think, are our biggest challenges. Air pollution, water pollution, soil, all kinds of pollution, and scarcity of water. And they're connected in so many ways to the kinds of damage that we're doing to the planet. So I think what we need technical fixes, we need social fixes, but we need to rethink also the way we're growing. Our entire growth model and this whole obsession with consumption and bigger cities, more cities, those kinds of things. If we can figure out a way to tackle this more holistically, that's the only way forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. So as a segue to that, maybe you can leave a message for our fellow citizens on how they can contribute, anything that you want to
I think so many people are contributing in such great ways. As you have been talking about, we just talked about before this interview, a few of the people that you've been meeting, amazing individuals across the Kaveri will be doing so much work. So I think we just need to learn from all the kinds of things that people are doing, figure out a way of connecting these dots and making more people inspired. So one of the things we were talking about, in fact, is inspiring youth and working with school children, and that's probably the way forward, because you have to do something at that level to change the world in the next few years.
Thank you so much for being with us on this hot afternoon.
I enjoyed it.